Greetings, New Hope family. I hope you are all happy and safe and well. Um, Pastor asked us to share some testimonies over Easter, and I would just like to share my journey of what it's meant for me to be stepping up for ministry. So, a week before Pastor Rhonda, Sister Rhonda, spoke about dry bones, the valley of dry bones in Ezekiel, and God breathing breath into those dry bones as a way of encouraging us to step up for ministry, because we have a lot of friends, family, people out there that we connect with who are dry bones, who are broken bones. And already God had been increasing a sense of urgency for me. He'd been saying things like, or getting me to ask questions like, if there was only a short amount of time left, what would be your focus? And then I was reading through the Bible, and I was reading Ezekiel 36 on Saturday, and Sister Rhonda preached on Ezekiel 37 on the Sunday. So I knew God was really speaking to me. When I stepped up in response to that sermon, Pastor Andrew prophetically said into my life, prepare yourself to be uncomfortable for the next 4 months, or out of your comfort zone for the next 4 months. And 3 nights later, I broke my bones, 2 bones in my arm, and obviously that disconnected my wrist. So that was definitely out of my comfort zone. And it was interesting for me that it had been a sermon about broken bones, and now I had broken bones. And I feel that God often prophetically shows you visually what is going to be happening in the future, what you need to accept by faith. So I feel like this journey of my broken bones has been teaching me about what it is to be the kind of person that God can breathe His breath, His Holy Spirit through to bring to life people who are broken, people who need healing, people who don't know God. The first thing I got, and the reason I want to share this with you is because I think some of the things I've learned aren't just specific to me. I think they're possibly a pattern for what happens when you decide to step up in ministry. So the first thing God did was set me apart. And I was set apart because I couldn't drive. I was dependent on Gus. Gus then disappeared for a week on a pre-planned family and business trip, so I was entirely alone. And then we've all been isolated through the coronavirus. So I think in a time of isolation, God is able to speak more clearly to us, kind of shuts out some of the voices that speak strongly into our minds, our lives, when we're in our normal life situation. And it seems to be a pattern. When Abraham was stepping up for ministry, God set him apart from his family. When Lot was being tested, he lost his family, and even his friends weren't a great comfort. And even when Jesus was beginning his ministry, he was set apart in the wilderness area. So I feel when you're wanting to be stepping up for ministry, God sets you apart to listen better, and so that He can begin to refine, define, purify, sanctify, all those kinds of things in our lives. And then the next thing, I feel like the bones and what He did with me with my bones was prophetic. And I also feel like that happens a lot in the Bible, that God will show prophetically what will happen that we then need to accept by faith. So if we think about Daniel's interpretation of Nebuchadnezzar's dream about the statue with I hope I get this right, the golden head, the silver breastplate, the silver shoulders, the bronze breastplate, or the legs of clay and iron. Essentially, those were dynasties, Babylonian, Medo-Persian, Grecian, Roman dynasties that were going to try and take over the whole of the world. And then what cut through was a stone, a cornerstone, Jesus Christ, who knocked down that whole image that whole statue, because he was going to establish an eternal kingdom. And that was prophetically spoken 2,000 years even before Christ was born. So prophetically, I think God shows us what's about to happen that we have to accept by faith. And I think if we think about faith, faith is the assurance of things, the things that we believe in, the conviction of things not yet seen. I kind of believe that there's kind of like two highways of life in a way. One highway is a spiritual highway, a highway of faith. And the other one is kind of like a highway of sight. And we often live by sight, by our senses. And to step up, to live on the highway of faith, we have to respond in belief. Faith is a gift from God, and we've got to respond to that faith by belief. And then belief is no use unless we speak it out, we confess it with our mouths, and we put it into action. Faith without action is dead. So the way in showing our belief in what we are having faith for is to speak it out and to act on it. So there are a lot of things that I have been learning. And one of the main things I have been learning is that in the end times, it's going to be exceptionally important that we're living righteously. And who better to show me how to live righteously than the next chapter or the next prophet I was going to read about, who was Daniel. And Daniel, the first step he did as kind of nobility in Israelite nation that was captured by Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon, was to not eat of the rich foods or drink of the wine in the king's house. And I think Daniel did this as a statement. I don't know if it was his everyday, forever afterwards way of living in the Babylonian kingdom, because I know later on in Daniel 10, I think it is, he says he abstained from living in that way or eating the food of the king, the wine, to pray for 3 weeks, because he was going to receive the vision of what it was going to be like in the end times. But what I learned from that is not so much about abstinence, but about self-discipline. So if we look in the Bible and we look at the fruits of the Spirit, it doesn't say one of the fruits of the Spirit is abstinence. It says one of the fruits of the Spirit is self-discipline. And what I learned is that abstinence does not replace addiction. So addiction is usually the cause of a way of trying to avoid deep pain. And if you just try to abstain from that addiction without dealing with the core issue, you just replace one addiction for another in your life. And what I learned also about self-discipline is that when you compromise self-discipline, it means that you are going back into control and God is no longer in control. So self-discipline is a way of showing that you are adhering to God's leadership in your life. The other thing I learned about self-discipline, I'm trying to think about what that was now. Maybe it'll come back to me later. Oh, that was it. That God has to encourage us towards self-discipline often through pain. It says in the Bible that he will discipline us as sons, and sometimes it's painful, but the righteous outcomes are worth it. And I thought about it, you know what? If we're self-disciplined, we don't need to experience pain. So those are some of the things I've been learning. The other thing I really learned was about faith. The first time I needed to have faith was around a lot of physical pain. So the night that I broke my arm, it was midnight, and they injected in, after they'd done x-rays and saw that it was broken, they called the orthopedic surgeon, and they put some local anesthetic into my wrist But before it even took, straight away, the orthopedic surgeon started to manipulate my arm, and it was excruciatingly painful. I had to tell him to stop. So he bandaged it up, and the next day I knew I had to face another manipulation, and I was terrified. When we got towards the hospital, I just had this sick feeling in my stomach. And I had to think about things like, well, how do pregnant women deal with the pain? How can I change my mindset so that I can deal with this pain? And instead of having fear, having a different kind of mindset. And Gus helped me in this. He said often people laugh to change the adrenaline in their body, and it kind of makes pain less. So I went through the same procedure, except thank goodness it was a different orthopedic surgeon. He injected local anesthetic into my wrist, but left it for 10 minutes to be operationalized before he actually did the manipulation. And in that 10 minutes, I was just proclaiming healing. I was laughing. I mean, if anybody had been in that room, they would have thought I was nuts. Anyway, then when they did the manipulation, I mean, it was quite significant. 2 men on one side and 1 man on another, pulling my wrist into place. I didn't feel too much pain. So that also scared me, because I was learning that God prophetically shows you what's about to happen to prepare you for what you need to accept and actual action by faith. I thought, oh no, God, I don't want to be, I hope that's not a prophecy of more pain, because I don't want to be, then actually maybe I don't want to step up for ministry. And then God had to show me that in situations of pain in the Bible, he would always provide a way. He would provide his angels. With Daniel, he shut the lion's mouth. With Paul and Silas in the prison, they praised God, and an earthquake happened, as Pastor preached last Sunday, and the shackles came off. Even other times when Paul was in prison, he was given friends and people who would come and minister to him, and special conditions. So God was reassuring me that no matter what pain we face in stepping up for ministry, he will always be there. He will always be there as a comfort, a protector, a provider. So that was the first lesson of faith I needed to learn. The second lesson of faith was, was very painful. My daughter sent me some news. And I have to be this is quite a vulnerable situation for me, but I think it's valuable to share because, you'll understand why as I share it. So you know that I am divorced, and Gus and I are in a second marriage. And obviously my children at 5 and 7 had to go through a big collapse in their family situation. So we have always worked hard at trying to facilitate healing because of that situation. But a meta-analysis of research about divorce, and a meta-analysis is a summary of a lot of research that has been done about the longevity of the consequences of divorce, says that at each nodal stage of development, so as children go from early childhood to middle childhood to adolescence to late teens, early adulthood, and now when they have their first child, and now my daughter's in a kind of midlife crisis kind of situation. So things are good in our relationship, but because they are good, she has felt able to separate from me. She doesn't want to hear my voice. She wants to find her own voice. And for a year, and this has not been a sadistic thing, she's been very loving in her withdrawal, but it's been very painful. For a year, I have not spoken with my daughter, not because I didn't want to, because she's focused on healing and a specific healing journey she has taken. Whether I agree with that or not, that's the course that she has taken. And in the meantime, she very graciously enabled me to still carry on having a great relationship with my son-in-law and my grandchildren. And then 2 weeks after I broke my arm, she said due to go for a trip there to be with my son-in-law and grandchildren at a holiday in a house on the coast in Wales. And about a month and a half later, they, including my daughter, I hoped, were due to come here to Sicily. And she told me that both trips were cancelled and that she had asked Sam to withdraw from any relationship with me and any relationship with my grandchildren. And that was just devastating. So I was on the beach, having some space to myself, crying. And there's this log that I walk, this long tree that I walk past maybe 4 times a day. And I'd never noticed that there was a string between one part of the log and another part of the log. And it had always been buried by the sand. But on this occasion, the sea had drawn back and that string was exposed. And I was walking backwards because I was watching my dog collect a stick out of the sea. I tripped over that string and I fell very heavily onto my elbow that was in the cast, and it immediately started to swell up. So inside my cast felt like a balloon about to burst, and I really felt like it might have been broken, and I was terrified. I was terrified of the consequences of that because I was about to have my cast come off in 10 days' time. So I went to have it x-rayed. They also thought it was broken, but it wasn't conclusive because they couldn't really x-ray properly through the cast. And I was just terrified. And then my sister sent me some beautiful healing verses to music. And a lot of them was about the healing of broken bones. And especially from Psalm 3, 5-8, saying we need to trust in the Lord with all our heart. And the concept that would be the peace that passes all understanding and the healing of our whole body. So as that music was playing, I just accepted by faith that my elbow was healed. And it was an incredible sense of relief, and I really believed for that. And when the cast came off, the elbow was not a problem at all. So I've had to learn a lot about faith, a lot about self-discipline, and I'm sorry that this has been so long, but I really wanted to share these things with you, just so that if any of this could be a valuable support in your journey towards stepping up to ministry, I'd like you to have the reassurance that God will be with you in every step of the way. You never need to fear. His perfect love means that we don't need to fear. And I think at this point I've spoken enough and I need to end. So bye for now.